What I also grew up with from 1972 when I was born onwards was an awareness of something what I now refer to as generational sacrifice or generational sin. Okay, as a young kid, I'm influenced from the day I was born to the day I died, so to say, as a human being. I was influenced by these things, these war memorials. They were erected in the 1920s, I believe, 1920 or 21, in the whole of the UK. Every village, every town has got all the village people's names, what died during what they called the Great War, 1914 to 1918. Okay, it literally destroyed a full generation of people. And it also created trauma for the next generation, the next generation, the next generation afterwards. Thankfully, during my search, I had a brilliant psychologist here in Åland, Niels Gustaf Eriksson, confirmed my thoughts about all this, and he was 100% right. He said it takes up to 4 generations to take that generational sin away from society. So it doesn't have to just be war, it could be a catastrophe. It could be like a volcano erupting in Mariam and half the town dies, or a ship sinking, for example. So, one of these was outside of my school. I used to see it on the way to school all the time. I saw the names of the people in my village and family names on there too. So it kind of sticks in your psyche, in your psychology. It becomes part of you. The United Kingdom is very much, it's in their psyche. It's well ingrained into British people. Okay, World War I. I'm sticking up a slide on this. It's not my career. Obviously, I'm not that old. I hope you don't think I'm that old that I served in World War I. Okay, 1918. I took a few statistics, and I've researched a hell of a lot on wars, and I just drew out one month, and the most relevant month to me is August 1918, because it's like 4 times the population of Åland died or were injured during that conflict. That was just from the British or the Commonwealth forces. That wasn't including the French, the Russian, Finnish, the German. So everyone dies in war. It's not one-sided. Okay. So I wanted to highlight to you, I could hit you with 3.6 million or 2.6 million and big figures like that, but it kind of doesn't sink into us as human beings. But if I say to you 4 times the population of Åland, it makes you think, oh, wow, it's a lot of people to die in 1 month, or killed, maimed, injured, psychologically destroyed in 1 month. Okay, my life as a kid, I didn't have this technology we've got with mobile phones. We've got instant access. I had comic books, and we had the TV, black and white mainly, when we were younger, because poorer people had black and white TVs. The license was cheaper than a coloured TV at that time. But kids were restricted on what you could see, so we didn't have much access. There was like a grens given to us as kids at 9 o'clock at night. It used to come on TV and tell your kids have to go to bed. You weren't allowed to stay up and watch the nasty stuff on the news. But however, as a young kid, I was easily influenced. This first thing in the 1980 embassy siege influenced me. Because part of me was like, wait a second, a couple of cousins and uncles and friends or whatever were going into the military, and I wanted to maybe try that. And this happened. These guys burst into the embassy. 7 Days, it's called on TV. If you want to watch the film on Netflix, it's called 7 Days. The embassy siege. It's portrayed by a guy called Rusty Furman, who was this guy who ran through with the gloves missing. And they went in, killed the bad guys, and I wanted to be part of that. I was like, wow, easily influenced. Okay. This guy here, too, was easily influenced. His dad was on that embassy siege. He was one of the special forces soldiers, and he followed his father's footsteps. He is a classic example of generational sin. He conducted his career in the military, too. He died during the same tour I was on later on in Afghanistan. He died before his dad. Another thing that influenced me, this was the first so-called televised war. Vietnam War, they always used to get footage like weeks later, maybe months later or whatever. This one was more or less the next day. And I was running back from school as fast as I could. I was only 10 years old. And I was like, wow, 4 months of real war on TV. British soldiers, heroes, victory, etc., etc. The national pride lifted in 1982 beyond belief, even though the whole of the UK was also stuck in an economical depression. So in one side of the UK, national pride was way down. On the other side, a good old war brought it back up again. Okay, Margaret Thatcher was famous for this as a politician because she brought the nation together, even though at the time the nation was falling apart due to economics. Okay, I was a young kid. I had no idea about the economical depression. I didn't really think that smartly at that point. I just knew that there was a war and it looked cool. I wanted to be a para. I wanted to be one of these guys, parachute regiment. My mum didn't want me to be a soldier, obviously. What mum does. Okay. Okay, simultaneously during my childhood, from more or less the day I was born until 2007, officially, the Northern Ireland campaign was going off. That was terrorism, so to say. It was put under the umbrella of terrorism. It was between two factions, Northern Irish, Protestant, Catholics, kind of fighting each other. Historically, it goes back quite a while. Historically, I think it goes back to 1600s. So they've never really calmed down with that conflict. It's been ongoing for a long, long time. The generational sin there is well ingrained in their psyche. Okay, that went to mainland UK and mainland Europe. I missed an attack in mainland Europe by hours when I stopped for a McDonald's once in Roermond in Holland, when 2 Australian tourists got killed by terrorists. We literally drove through about 10 hours later after all this incident. Couldn't get a McDonald's. Right, another thing what affected me as a child, probably my decision making, was a miners' strike. For a full year, our community were on strike. They wanted to keep their jobs. They were told by the government, you're not cost effective, we can get cheaper coal from places like South Africa, for example, where the labour is much cheaper. And literally, I think up to 500,000 people UK-wide went on strike for a year. Many didn't go on strike, so there was a lot of in-house animosity between the society we lived in. I remember at the top of a street, people shouting and smashing windows while the police were stopping them smashing windows of one of my neighbours because he was going to work during that year crisis. There was food kitchens, etc., etc., and the result was we lost. The British people lost. There's actually, I'm not even sure how many mines are left now, but maybe can count on one hand now, if there still is any at all. It literally tore apart the entire community, and it tore apart the community spirit, what in them days made the UK quite strong. Okay, and that made quite a psychological effect on my decision making. Whereas in one hand, I was given this glory, go and join the army. The other hand, any future job you thought you may have in the coal mines, it's not going to be there. It went. Okay, and I think not long after the coal mines, about 6 or 7 years later, one of my home villages attached to my town was like voted the most poorest place in the whole of the UK, a place called Grindthorpe. I think that was about 1994 that statistic came out. So the entire society went down in the space of 10 years because of lack of jobs, lack of coal mines, for example. So it made me join the military. Here I am now giving you a lecture many years later. Okay, so in 1988 I tried to join the military. I failed. I had a medical reason and the doctor referred me for a full year. I was devastated. I at school didn't do particularly well. I was more practically minded. My exam results, you couldn't even write on a piece of paper. They were pretty poor. Okay, and I got referred for a year. So I didn't know what to do. My mum, knowing me, was like, oh great, brilliant. This means he's not going in the army. I'll get him a job. So she spoke to one of her friends in the pub she worked in. And I got a job as a plumber, a VVS Rome Opera for a year. But still in my heart, I was like, I still want to be a soldier. I want to be a soldier. I'm going to join. During that time, I thought about going to the French Foreign Legion because my male ego in me wanted to be a soldier. No one could stop me. But in 1989, I joined. So joined the Royal Engineers in 1989. And from 1989 to 1998, I had what I call quite a boring period in my career. I lived like 3 years in Cyprus, 3 years in Germany. Did loads of parachuting, did loads of adventurous stuff, went on exercise, North Africa, Middle East. Managed to live in Cyprus for 3 years, Germany, UK also. That was relatively boring to me, but during that period, the reason why I'll say it's boring is in the next slide, is during that time wars were going on. And talking now from a perspective as a soldier, I refer to it as like a fireman or a fire lady. Okay? You don't get taught to be a fireman and not run into fires. You want to go and feed that ego, you want to think, right, is my training, put it to use. In 1991, I was a battle casualty reserve for the Gulf War. I think there was about 50,000 soldiers or whatever went. I stuck in Germany, kind of watching it on the news, thinking, damn, I'm missing out on this. And I remember it was the first time I had a little tiny egotistical thing afterwards. One of my soldiers, one of my mates was on a course with me and he got a medal and he's like, yeah, check this out. was in Iraq. He had a suntan and he'd been in Iraq. He'd been to war. I was jealous. I will truthful, I was jealous. Okay, so when you get medals, they're mainly egotistical driven things. You get given them for all these little tours, you go on all these operations, for example, and I was jealous. Okay, the male ego in me wanted to go to war. This didn't happen for a while. I kind of stayed in the army because the British Army used to have a brilliant pension, and I grew up in a place where I was poor. Pensions were, if you get a pension at 40 years old, that's like brilliant. There's not many jobs do that these days. And the British Army have kind of stopped doing it. But I was caught in something what was called a pension trap. The longer you did, the more you were trapped in the job, and you thought, well, it's not long till I leave. But then started more wars and more conflicts. 92 and 95 in Bosnia, I was on exercise in the UK, and I remember seeing these vehicles, these white vehicles getting painted up white in the middle of this green land in the UK, and there was us in our camouflage vehicles, and I was envious. I saw one of the units we were exercising with preparing to deploy to go to Bosnia. And you've got to be careful what you wish for in life. This is something I've learned the hard way. Okay, although I was envious, during that period of Bosnia or afterwards, I served with people who'd come back from Bosnia, and they'd seen the brutality of the Bosnian war. And only last week, I was speaking to this guy, Mark. I change my PowerPoints every time, and I speak to guys, renew the content. Mark and I served in Iraq together. He was a medic. He's now an ambulance medic in the UK. He's traumatized from 1993 in Bosnia. He was in a place called Srebrenica. If anyone's heard about the Srebrenica massacre, 8,000 Muslim men and boys all killed, separated from their wives and the rest of the children, literally massacred. He was one of a group of people I had to go and like exhume and sort all that mess out. The whole psychological effect it had on Mark is still present with him. But last week he said, it's all right, I won't commit suicide, I've got my son to live for. Okay, this is the effects of war. I'm kind of glad I didn't go there, because all my friends who did go there saw extreme cases of man's inhumanity to man, as in extreme cases. The worst things you can think about were all kind of put in this book written by a newspaper reporter, and I recommend it to any human being to read it. And I challenge you all not to cry when you read it, okay? Because it was just neighbours killing neighbours. People who'd grown up together with some kind of strange generational sin took a side, and then all of a sudden the next day were torturing and killing each other. I won't go into details of some of the things my friends have told me, but they were obscene, they were extreme. So I'm kind of glad I didn't go to these wars, even though at the time, still wanted to go to them. I was a soldier, I wanted to do it. This kind of, amongst other operational tours in the world, kind of let me lose a little faith for the United Nations. Most guys who went there were very upset with the United Nations because their hands were tied. They were stuck in these warring factors and they couldn't stop people killing each other. Even though at times they wanted to, they weren't allowed to take sides. They had to be neutral. So they sometimes had to watch people getting slaughtered and couldn't do anything about it because their orders were to stay to one side. There's much documentation of this, and actually psychologist Niels Gustav Eriksson, when I spoke to him after I moved to Åland, he tracked many Swedish veterans from Bosnia who were psychologically messed up from their part in this conflict. Okay, so the point I want to get across to you is I was still envious, still wanted to go to war, still wanted to be that fireman but got his hands burnt or singed a little bit. Simultaneously, a few of my friends, whilst I was living in Cyprus, 94 to 97, got posted to Cyprus afterwards, and they'd been to Rwanda, and then they started talking to me about Rwanda, and we didn't have Facebook giving us posts up and said, poor old Rob's got his leg blown off in Rwanda. In them days it was more verbal. Did you hear about Rob? I was in basic training with Rob in 1989. Brilliant guy. He joined the army again after leaving, after building the Channel Tunnel. He got some good money on the Channel Tunnel and then joined the army again a few years later and was in the same intake as me. And he got his leg blown off in Rwanda. And these guys talked about Rwanda a little bit, and it kind of stuck in my head, and I thought, I'm a person who's curious. If I don't know anything, I like to research it. I like to read about it. So I read about Rwanda. Then I got this book after this guy really chastised the United Nations. He was in charge of a United Nations mission Rwanda was a genocide, probably our worst modern day genocide. Up to 800,000 people from one of the tribes were killed mercilessly. Okay, and there was real cases of child soldiers there as well during the Rwanda conflict, where kids were killing these people and murdering them. Child soldiers or child conflict is a big thing in the world. It's very much hush-hush, but it's the United Nations are aware of it. But that genocide was attained on the United Nations. It was a failure. Okay, and it also reinforced to me. I was like, wait a second, what are these guys doing? Okay, and I'm trying to take all this in as a human being as I'm going through my life. So I researched it a little. Okay, so then when I moved from Cyprus to Germany in 1998, I got instantly sent on a posting to South Georgia. South Georgia is part of the history of the Falkland Islands War. It was the first place what was taken by the Argentinians, by some Argentinian scrap metal dealers apparently at the start of the war. So our government thought it pertinent to have a detachment there at all times. So I went with half a dozen Royal Marines, a few other guys, some Royal Engineers, and we had a whale of a time there, literally. So all this best nature in the world. South Georgia is one of the top natural places in the world where everyone must visit for nature, seals, whales, penguins, etc., etc. But we were there to do a job, so part of our job was patrolling, etc. For me, the reason I've mentioned this is it was the first stage of where trauma hit me, but I didn't realize trauma hit me. Okay, we all as human beings will encounter trauma. It's part of life. Okay, some of you probably, almost certainly, have encountered some form of trauma in your life already at such a young age, and it won't stop there. We'll continue to encounter it. First trauma I encountered there was at a dinner time. We had a Mayday call, and one of my jobs as a boat operator was to go out and as a patrol vessel to the fishing vessels, but this fishing vessel was way too far out to sea. You guys coming from a seafaring nation understand the risks of the sea. Okay, I'm sure some of your parents or families or aunties or uncles or whatever work at sea. I'm sure some of you might work at sea as well. So it's a brutal place. My ship sank whilst fishing, and it stuck in my psyche. And it was the first traumatic incident I was involved in. We had to go and recover several dead bodies of the ones they managed to recover. So part of our job was to stick these dead bodies into a big fridge and then go and look after the sailors who'd survived. And trauma, I've learned since then, works in such a weird way, okay, that you don't have primary trauma, you have secondary and third trauma, for example. When we were listening to these guys talk about their experiences on the boat, some of them were withdrawn, some of them were opening up, some of them were in shock. One of them, a father, was telling us how he was so angry that he'd convinced his son to come to sea because they never recovered his son's body. Okay, so that kind of trauma sits in your psyche, and that was the first time I encountered trauma. This guy here, last man off, Matt Lewis, he was one of the British fisheries men who was on that boat who survived. And how they survived, I will never know because it was absolutely freezing. Okay, and it took him like 16 years later, he wrote about it. Because his trauma was that long-winded that, like survival trauma and seeing people die in his lifeboat, for example, it took him that long to process his own trauma. So I read the book, and we're in the back paragraph somewhere, but that was my bit. We looked after these people, and then we put the frozen bodies onto a ship in another fridge and shipped them off to the mortuary somewhere, and that was it, forgotten. Okay, the one thing what affected us on this trauma road was not just the guys who were dead after we did autopsies, some of the guys who were alive. It was a South African boat. They were riddled with HIV. A large percentage of them were HIV positive. Okay, so one of our guys who was married was proper scared because we didn't have gloves in them days. We didn't really wear the surgical gloves. So we all got tested for HIV. None of us were. And that was that story. So then straight away, a year after, in the same unit in Germany, I was trying to sort out for my wife to come and live over with me in Germany because I had this sudden tour to go to South Georgia, so she went back to England to live. Just as she was confirming to me she was about to come over and join me, the war in Kosovo kicked off. And we had 2 weeks' notice. There you go, pack your bags, get your wagons ready, you're off to Kosovo. Kosovo, from what I then knew, was a part of the old former Yugoslavia. And there was potential of it being as bad as Yugoslavia and Bosnia. Okay, so we did what we did, professionally packed and weren't ready to go to war, because that was our role. We were going there to take the Serbians out of Kosovo because they were apparently doing all the bad ethnic cleansing. So you listen to what the scenario is and you go there and do your job. But what happened was overnight, a full town of Pristina, plus other towns, Peć and several others, the ethnic Albanians at gunpoint were told by the Serbians, get out or you die. Simple. Didn't matter. There was no questions. There was no, well, I've got to go to school tomorrow. There was none of that. They literally just emptied the entire towns of a certain ethnic amount of people and said, go down to the border, you're NATO's problem. NATO can deal with you. They want to protect you. At this point, the war had started. The bombing campaign was going full. Okay, it had been going on for several weeks. So then we had to re-roll as soldiers and engineers. Naturally, we worked a lot in water supply and things like that and sustainability. So our job re-rolled to look after these refugees. But politics got in the way a little bit. These guys, these refugees were caught on the border for several days, almost to a stage where they were going down to be a catastrophe, where dysentery, etc., was starting to kick in, because 3 or 4 days into it with no proper sanitation, no water, all these pregnant women, all these elderly, like this family up there on the top, okay, we're getting close to be a nightmare. Okay, then the politics got involved and they got ushered towards all these makeshift camps. We luckily worked for like 2 weeks without hardly any sleep, and we looked after them. Okay, simultaneously at that point, psychologically for me, my granddad died whilst we were looking after all these people. In those days, we weren't allowed to just jump on a plane and go back. I think I got a 5-minute phone call to my dad and say, I'm sorry, can't make it back. And I had a bit of an epiphany there where I sensed my granddad was saying, no, kid, stay there, you're doing good. Look after me. Okay, so that was a little emotional period for me. And then after the refugees, we sustained it, we looked after them. Okay, it wasn't a bigger disaster as it could have been, but it was close. Okay, we then changed back to our war fighting role. The war was commencing at the time, and NATO was still bombing them and destroying them, etc., etc. Okay, and then we went up into Kosovo itself, and there's a picture of me up in Kosovo in a village called Klina. We were helping rebuilding bridges to open up the supply routes. One of my other jobs was to build bridges. We had many jobs. I was a master of lots of trades. Okay, so me and myself, Dave, and Dave was in Bosnia. He was the one who said to me there, and I'll never forget his words, he said, I never wanted to smell that again. Because where we were standing around those tanks aren't just bits of metal, the bits of human beings what have been blown up all over the place into 1,000 million bits. Okay, and you could smell death, and it was on my clothes. We couldn't get rid of it for like a week or so. We didn't really have a washing machine to put our stuff into and wash off that smell. The stench of death was with me for at least a week afterwards. And it opened up some of his traumas from Bosnia, when it smelt similar atrocities where people have been burnt to death in houses, etc. Okay, so that kind of trauma sticks in your life. And it's another form of trauma, okay? You can see someone die, you can touch, you can smell, all your senses are part of this traumatic triangle. Okay, and that stuck with me, that smell. For bacon, for example, I can't cook bacon till it burns, otherwise I get that smell back. Okay, but I do love bacon. Okay, what it taught me also is, and this was a learning process of war, it taught me that war doesn't simply end there. Okay, the destruction afterwards. This one is a perfect example of depleted uranium. If you notice, any of you sleuths there, that tank we were stood next to is there. And an article was written by someone what I found on the internet, and I took it, I stole their article just to get a point across. But depleted uranium sticks in the environment for weeks, years afterwards, okay? And it's very high for giving leukemia and such likes to kids. What struck me most in the Getty Images article was these little kids playing on the same tanks where we accumulated for a photograph. They're just playing, as kids should do, not knowingly understanding that they're probably inhaling depleted uranium dust. Every conflict I was in the military, these depleted uranium were used. Iraq, Kosovo, Afghanistan. to name a few. Okay, and it was on the news only last year about them sending depleted uranium to Ukraine. So once it's used, who's cleaning it up? Nobody. It just has an ongoing legacy and an ongoing effect. Also, we were aware of this. We were told that the entire border of Kosovo was going to be mined. I hate mines. I've worked with them my entire army career as an engineer. I taught mines. I became quite high up in the teaching level of mine warfare. Okay, does anyone know who that lady is in the middle, by the way? Princess Diana, a legend in the royal family, died way too early. One of her greatest achievements in the world was doing a halo toast, and not just that, creating something called the Ottawa Convention or the Ottawa Treaty, where a lot of nations signed up to getting rid of anti-personnel mines. If you see a mine victim, as I did in Kosovo, a young girl stood at the side of the road with like on a crutch with a leg missing, you then start to think, wait a second, she's done such a tremendous job to save these young kids. Most kids get affected by anti-personnel mines after the conflicts have finished. The world is riddled with them. I won't hit you with statistics because there's millions and hundreds of places. However, the statistics I will use, $3 to $75 to make to make a mine. They're relatively cheap, and they are the best soldiers in the world. You put a fuse in them, stick them in the ground. They're normally waterproof and stay there for years. They do not complain. They don't have to check their phone for updates and stuff. They just lie there and wait for something or someone to stand on top of it. If it's the correct weight, bang, it explodes. Brutal. But it takes up to $300 and $300 to $1,000 to get them out of the ground. I have friends who've worked doing that. I was offered jobs to do similar as well. I turned them down. Civilian contractors is something what I was aware of then in Kosovo. I've only picked out one. The reason I picked that out was the first one I encountered. The first one I saw was KBR building camps in Kosovo, and then later I saw them in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's an American company. It's worth billions, I should imagine now. And I saw it grow over my career from a relatively small company to big bucks. There's a lot of money in building things back up again. There's a lot of money in finding mines. Okay? It's cheap to make them, chuck them in the ground, forget about them. There's a lot of money to be made taking them out. Okay? Two of my friends there, I lived in Cyprus with this guy for 3 years, and then I ended up working with him on my last year at school. He died in Syria, and he died in Iraq, and I was in Iraq with that guy as well. They were earning up to $10,000 per month to go and either teach or to defuse mines or IEDs. And his story is horrible. It took him like 3 months to get his body back. His 5 kids and his mum was devastated because they couldn't get him back because he wasn't insured anymore because he was apparently doing an illegal method of operation on the mines. So his insurance was invalidated until they validated it, and then he came back to England and got buried. Okay, but you make the choices, you live with them. It's brutal. He was following the money. That's life. Okay, so me, 2003 in Iraq. I was close to separation at this point, or I just separated from my wife, and I was a bit of a lost soul, I can admit, and I was chasing war. I volunteered to go to Iraq in 2003. 44,000, thereabouts, British soldiers deployed there, plus Americans, plus other countries. Okay, out of that 44,000, 6,000 of them were reserves, what were called up. Most of those guys in my unit who were reserves didn't want to be there. They'd done their time in the army. I was like, I just got my own business up and running. I've just done this, I've just done that. One of the guys who drove around in my wagon with me was whining for the entire 5 months because he'd left his family and his kids. When he said to me, Chris, I've just got my life back together. I don't want to be doing this shit anymore. But he felt imposed to do it. Felt he had to do it. He was a reservist. Okay, felt that loyalty, etc. Knowing what he knows now, he wouldn't go back again. I kept his head straight for 5 months. During that tour, I saw Iraq devastated. I saw what was, in my opinion, a relatively modern country, quite modern country, what had just been blown to shit by us. Okay, and I couldn't work it out. Again, I have to process these things. I'm like, wait a second, our government says there's weapons of mass destruction. They were proven false. Okay, Tony Blair blatantly lied, got us there, destroyed all these places, and it's never been the same since. It's not had peace since 2003. Again, don't quote me here, but I think there's different sources what say up to 1 million people killed or dead since then. Most of them kids. There's most of the water facilities, I saw water facilities destroyed out there. And they're not a legal target in any war. You shouldn't be destroying sanitation, water, etc. Okay? So it opened my eyes a little bit, and I was putting these pieces in block, building up a picture of my career. But I still was convinced at that point we were doing the right thing because our government was telling us so. Why would they lie? Okay, then straight away, as soon as I came back, I went to war. I sort of scratched that itch a little bit. I saw war, I saw bombs going in and that kind of stuff. But then I volunteered to my own country to go to Northern Ireland. I literally been back about 4 months and I trained up. And at this time I trained up in counter-terrorism search and bomb disposal. And we had a team that were tasked to go out to bombs. So our job was to find bombs, secure them, so a guy could go in his nice jacket, clip a few wires, get some medals, etc., etc. And that was our job. And we were very busy there. But it opened up my eyes also to terrorism and also hand in hand, organised crime. There was lots of drugs involved with terrorism. It helps with funding. We found lots of drugs and lots of diesel refineries and such likes, and it all comes hand in hand. Every conflict we've been to, there's always been an element of terrorism connected into it, because I worked in that branch. I had an eye on it. We saw paperwork, what told us stuff, and we saw physical things. This war stopped, or this conflict stopped in 2007. However, 2 of my soldiers, this guy I had working with me for about the better part of a year, got assassinated at the front gate as they were waiting for a pizza before we deployed to Afghanistan in 2009. Terrorists came up, shot 4 or 5 of them, and went up and finished 2 off in the head. I tried to do a third, but he deflected it with his hand. He's still alive. I spoke to him about at the start of this month. The anniversary was the 7th of March, actually, of them guys, Mazarine Barracks. And the terrorists got arrested and then got let off about 2 years later. Okay, so devastating news for us. But it proved to us that that conflict was still kind of ongoing. The day after that attack, a policeman got shot also. Okay, but it was hushed in the news because they wanted peace. So the news will manipulate when they want, if they want, to keep a conflict being good or bad. If they want it quiet, they'll keep it quiet. And those 2 guys got exterminated at the front gate waiting for a pizza. Okay, in 2005, I shot off to somewhere in Cyprus, United Nations. Does anyone know Cyprus or the history of it? Has anyone been to Cyprus? Anyone been to Ayia Napa? Where did you go?
I don't know, I was so little.
You were so little. Cyprus is beautiful. Some of the best sunshine islands in the world. Greek, on the Greek side and the northern side in the Turkish. 1974, a war broke out there. The Turkish kind of invaded. There was a bit of ethnic cleansing going on. I don't take political sides anymore, but 2 sides fought each other and it escalated. And since then, there's been like a border what's been patrolled by the United Nations since 1974. It's one of the oldest conflicts, probably older than, no, not as old as Korea, South Korea and North Korea. But it's one of the oldest conflicts that the United Nations got involved in, what's not yet been sorted out. But in there was lots of minefields. This sign is me there. One of my mates or one of my soldiers was chopping something up, and we were decommissioning patrol bases and stuff, and we were also decommissioning minefields. What I saw there was civilian contractors I spoke about, from Africa actually, cheap labour, okay, got in for mines. Those guys were over from Africa. I dread to think how much or little they were being paid to prod for mines as part of something like the Halo Trust. And we were decommissioning minefields. My job was to sign off the paperwork that the minefield was gone, so a farmer then could go there and lay his crops afterwards. Because the farmers were allowed to go into the no man's zone and use a certain amount of farmland if they wanted to risk getting blown up. So during that time I saw minefield decommissioning firsthand. Okay, and I saw how it kind of worked because I was semi-involved in it. Brilliant 6 months, opened my eyes again to the United Nations and opened up another piece to my puzzle on how I think as a human being. Okay, I still hadn't truly scratched my itch. Still wanted to go to war. I wanted to be in combat. Okay, I got what I wished for. I gained promotion after Cyprus and then got a higher up promotion, and they flew me off to Iraq in 2007. Okay, and we spent 6 to 7 months there. Because I'd already done counter-terrorism and search and bomb disposal, I didn't need to get trained up again. I only had to do a bolt-on course and become a higher level in charge of a team. So our job was to do twofold: strike ops and war fighting. For example, the strike ops involved going into enemy territory, getting blown up and getting shot at, okay, and finding terrorist equipment and such like. So we did it, and it was the first time I saw soldiers die. Okay, it was the first time we were on the receiving end, and we got a taste of our own medicine, so to say. It wasn't the last time. Saw several soldiers die in Iraq. First one was a guy who got shot through the neck trying to save one of his mates who got shot through the back. And at the same time, I almost got shot trying to save the guy who tried to save the other guy who tried to save the guy. That's a little complex. So 4 or 5 guys got injured on the first op I was on, and I got some kind of bravery award for being a brave guy, saving the other guy. It's the first time I used all these things: tourniquets and first field dressings. Any of you guys going to be medics, by the way, or doctors or nurses? That's what we use in the military. Stop traumatic bleeding. Hand it around. Play with it. Okay. First time I used that in combat under fire, and it wasn't the last. I got to use it several times during my career on different traumatic injuries, watching soldiers die. During the 6-month period there as well, we were getting rocketed from the minute we more or less landed on the plane, and mortared 3, 4, 5 times a day, mostly at dinner times, mostly at breakfast, mostly when you were going for a shower in your downtime. So we used to have conversations under the table, chatting to each other as you do, whilst eating your food as rockets were coming in over your head, smashing about here, there and everywhere. Okay, it was a bit of a traumatic period. It taught me trauma onto another level now. So now my trauma levels were building up to a level where I'd seen a fair bit, okay, but in different degrees. Okay, I'd encountered trauma.
Did the trauma affect you at that time, or
No.
you just build it up?
No, it built up. Brilliant question, because trauma is a tremendously complex thing. Any of us who encounter trauma are not guaranteed it's going to affect you there and then or afterwards. It can affect you years down the line. They say with military trauma, the average time is 15 years afterwards. But funnily enough, I was a trauma manager at that point. Go on.
Were you aware of your trauma? Or was it...
Not then. Afterwards, after Iraq, I had a little taste of it when I was driving around the UK once, and I just stopped for no reason and burst into tears, and I had no idea why. I remember phoning my best friend, who's he's got no remorse whatsoever. He gave me lots of shit on the telephone and basically said, "Well, get a grip of yourself, mate." And I said, "No, mate, I don't know what's happening. I'm crying." And I didn't know why. I couldn't understand it. My brain was somehow processing it, and I didn't understand why. Okay, because when you have a near-death experience, any of us can have this, and then many of us do. Because I almost died saving one of the guys out there. You start to process it when you're in a safe environment. When you're in a not safe environment, you're still quite highly tensed and still focusing on your job. I nearly died several times out there, especially when the Americans tried to kill me with a 50 cal gun when we were going to help them. That was always fun. Okay. And that's another one of my stories. I've got stories that can last hours, but I can't got time to go into them. Okay, so the trauma, brilliant question. It's a complex beast, but we'll go into it in a little while. Bomb disposal, these bombs, was the first time we encountered them. I put some up just for interest for you guys. Most of the bombs they were using were quite technical bombs, even though they're improvised explosives. And these little switch mechanisms here were like your sensors off the walls. Okay, so when a vehicle came, you could switch it on and off. We called them telemetry switches. So every time you come in the room and the light comes on, it was kind of like that. So every time a vehicle went past, boom, and it penetrate and kill whoever was in it. We went to many jobs where people had been killed. That was our job, to do secondary explosions as well, and to find secondary devices and to try and get them off the roads. So we encountered a lot of IEDs during that 6-7 month period. Then, in between that time, I got promoted again. Promotion's a double-edged sword, they say in English. In some ways it's good, but it comes with consequence. Okay, that consequence was I was then posted to another unit very quickly, went on a training year, to Canada and Belize. And then after we did all that beautiful training in these two great places, they deployed us to Afghanistan. Again, I couldn't get rid of this job I'd done. We had to fulfill a post, we had to do bomb disposal, and I went to Afghanistan again. I didn't want to go to Afghanistan doing bomb disposal again, but they did. So more or less 3 tours in a row, I was doing bomb disposal. By now, it wasn't fun, because Afghanistan was a whole different world. It was brutal. During that period in 2009, there was the heaviest casualty rate for the British Army. Compared to modern wars like Ukraine, it's nothing, but for us, it was quite heavy. So during that time, I encountered war fighting. The first operation we were training for, to go on here, some tremendous pictures from it. A Danish tank getting blown up, for example. They didn't die, they were injured, but they were fine. Okay, it was kinetic, it was full-on fighting. We called it a success. But in the long run, it was successful about killing another human being. Up to 80, 90 Afghanis died that day, or that 4 days. One of us got shot in the arse cheeks. You can see him there getting extracted by his friends. Okay, none of my guys got injured or killed. I was happy at that point. But the night before we went on that operation was the night we found out about the 2 guys getting killed collecting a pizza in Ireland. They were waiting to fly over, and we'd already came a month earlier, or several weeks earlier, not even a month, maybe 2 weeks. Okay, so that 4-day operation was my guys' taste of combat. I'd already tasted it a little bit in Iraq, and it was an eye-opener for them. Kind of made them grow up overnight. Okay, all of them grew up in their own ways out in Afghanistan. And then we carried on with bomb disposal for the 6-7 months. Intertwined in that bomb disposal, we were constantly getting ambushed or attacked. You couldn't then just go and get rid of a bomb. They would purposely put a bomb there sometimes just to take a go at you and have a go at you and attack you. And sometimes we were on planned missions. During that tour was a month-long or month-and-a-half-long planned mission where many, many British soldiers died. The Afghanis gave us a good run for our money and kicked our ass a little. And it traumatized a lot of people. And it was pretty pointless, like the whole of Afghanistan, to be fair. Now I've had a chance to reflect on it. These bombs were made improvised to the extreme, as cheap as you can. Wooden planks, a couple of batteries, what you take from 9-volt batteries, carbon fibers from the inside, carbon fiber rods, onto a detonator, into ammonium nitrate fertilizer, which was, funnily enough, provided by the United Nations for their farming. But it's up to an high enough level, ammonium content, that it's weapons grade. All you have to do is mix it with fine aluminium powder, put a nice good quality detonator into it, and boom. So the only thing they probably had to pay for was a good detonator. The rest was improvised. These things, these pressure plates, that kind of device, 3 to 5 kilograms, would take a man's torso up to there off. At least 1 leg, 2, maybe a third, maybe an arm. If he was lucky to survive, he might have lost 2 legs and an arm, as one of our guys did. Okay, going back to your question, trauma. I was still in the army till 2012. I'd accumulated all this trauma up. Afghanistan, in a nutshell, I could talk for hours about all the trauma incidents I was in. I was blown up more than a beach ball. I got blown up a lot. My team did too. I lost one of my soldiers and one was injured during one particular explosion, and then on other explosions, I saw multiple casualties, up to 7, 8 casualties at one point. Okay, and other explosions we reacted to, there was up to 15 killed or injured. Okay, brutal amount of trauma. I managed to contain it all, but little bits came out, as you said. Did I have little signs? There was little signs, yeah, of course. How do you not think about seeing a 21-year-old lad's leg hanging off and bleeding to death, and his last words and the last bits of life? How do you not think about that? It'd be inhumane not to think about it. Okay, my trauma, funnily enough, came at the birth of my daughter, or 4 weeks before. My daughter, or my ex, was diagnosed with malignant melanoma 4 weeks before she gave birth to my daughter. And then as a cursory check, for 2 years afterwards, my daughter went to hospital. So for the first 2 years of my daughter's life, my daughter was going to cancer checks about every 3 months, x-rays, etc., and scans, and you name it, blood tests. So every time she got a little bit of cold, I thought she was going to get some kind of leukemia or something. I had no idea. And simultaneously, my ex then got traumatized during childbirth. She almost didn't give birth. She thought she was dying during childbirth. And that traumatic incident, when she said goodbye to me, broke the bubble for me. As a human being, I wasn't the same person again after that. It opened up the whole plethora of trauma I'd had from my entire life. Okay? The easiest way I explain it was as a puzzle. That picture up on the right hand side there is it. You imagine you build a puzzle. Your life is a puzzle, and you're constantly putting your parts to your puzzle. You're making your mistakes. Things are going wrong, but somehow someone came up, messed this puzzle up, and those bits were all over the place. That was my life. That was all my trauma, and I didn't have the capability to put it back together. I was broken. I was an absolute broken man. I was at the top of my game. I got posted to Defence Training Regiment to instruct other guys to go out there because I was so well qualified in the job I was doing, but I couldn't talk to a human being. If you'd have come up and asked me a question, "Oh, Chris, how are you doing today?" I would have just broke into tears. "I'm fine." And I was useless. I was no use to anyone. I was no use to my ex, my kids, anyone. I was a broken man. That's when my trauma first came out, and it flooded out. That's when it became complex trauma, or post-traumatic stress disorder, or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I didn't get diagnosed till 2012 by this fine gentleman here. And when the military didn't diagnose me, because if they diagnosed you with PTSD, you had a right to claim, because you didn't start that job with PTSD, you finished the job with it. So they kind of said, "Oh, it's okay." They tried to put me on medication, they tried to put me on antidepressants, etc. I had a lot of treatments, but they never actually said you've got PTSD. I only actually got it from this gentleman here, who had worked with PTSD before. So I've thanked him since, because it helped me. You can't fix something if you don't know what's wrong with it. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I had no idea. I thought, why can't I function like a normal human being? What is wrong with me? So, complex trauma. It's not just soldiers. This is just my history, just my story. It can be child abuse, it can be alcohol abuse, it can be anything. Unfortunately, humans are not nice creatures. These things happen. We're all traumatized at some point in our life. I'm not unique. I'm not special. Okay? I just happen to have an extreme case of trauma from my choice of career. What it also did to me, as part of my growing back as a person, okay, so I'm kind of grateful for my trauma. I'm not negative about it anymore. It helped me understand what I've been part of, who I was as a person, what my role in life was, and part of that understanding is I had to absorb. I can't stop buying books. Some people are addicted to heroin and stuff. I'm addicted to books. Okay, I cannot stop buying books. I've got a thirst for information to understand me, understand how I was broken, what I was part of. So I continued and bought all these books. Okay, I went all the way back to the First World War. That's part of our heritage. It's part of our generational trauma. I went through all the conflicts. I then found a book here, War is a Racket, which this guy had done the same. This was the highest serving American soldier after the First World War, and said war is only about making money. And he puts it there in black and white. And if you've got a guy who's gone all the way up the ranks in the military, what's telling you that, some truth's hidden in it. Okay, but he's not hiding it. It's pretty obvious. Okay, when I come to this conclusion, wait a second, what was I part of? What's destroyed me? Why did I do it? I made a deal with the devil in my own job. Okay, by following that job, it came with consequence, but it was my choice. There's only me to blame. Okay, so I went through all these books. The one book what saved my life, and I always make reference to it here, is Zen, the Art of Happiness. I'm no Buddhist monk, never have been. Okay, I was semi-religious, but now I'm very spiritual in my own way. I found my own spiritual way. But this book was given to me by my nephew when I managed to get back to the UK. And weeks before I got back, we were speaking on the internet, and he was the firstborn in our family, and he's a smart, lovely guy, intelligent. He said, "Uncle Chris, you need this book." And excuse my French now, I'm going to swear. I said to him, "Fuck off, Connor." I said, "I'm not going to read that." He said, "No, seriously, you need to read that." So I took him at his word, and I read it. And I read it all the way back on the plane. And then I read it again. And at this point, I was really an all-time low here in Åland. I was actually suicidal. And the first time I was suicidal, I got referred to the doctors and I got a bit more therapy. I got a bit of time off work. The second time I was suicidal, I think I took like a rucksack, went to the place near Vikinghallen, was going to fill up the rucksack with rocks, tie it off so I couldn't undo it, and just jump in the water. All right, I'd already planned it. That's what you do when you think about suicide, you plan it. But I took this with me on a picnic. Okay, I was going to have a last meal, of course, before I thought about killing myself. And I read it and burst into tears. But I don't read it fully anymore. I just open up bits. And it opened up uncannily on the bit what says about choice. It's up to you to välja. It's up to you to choose. There's no right or wrong in life, but it's up to you to choose. And at that point, I chose life. That's how simple it was. Okay? I kind of can't thank Connor, my nephew, enough for that book. Saved my life. Saved my life. And thoroughly recommend it if anyone's on a low, or on a downer. Read it, but read it knowing that it's going to help you. You have to have an open mind, and it helped me. Okay. So I got that thirst of knowledge, collected lots of books, and I'm still in that process now. And this is part of that process. Saying to you, I've made a choice. My choice is to pass over to you my experiences. Okay? Both positives, negatives. And for you to choose whether you absorb it or question it. It's up to you. It's your choice. We all make choices. Okay? Do you want a break, guys?
Jag tänker att vi kör på eftersom så får de sluta 5 minuter tidigare istället.
Happy days. Okay. True cost of war. And again, to reiterate, by the way, this is my perception. It's not anyone else's. Double check any of these, cross-reference anything I've said. In fact, I want you to. I'd love to be able to give you each a project and say, go and research it and tell me about it. But it's my perception, the true cost of war. These pictures are ones of several of the guys who I know who got killed, either going on a plane, flying back to their mums, and the parents in the background. This is Teresa. Jordan was a soldier I watched die in Afghanistan. Watched him bleed out. Tried to help him, couldn't. He'd lost his leg up to there, and this leg would have been amputated. Most of his fingers were missing, and his probably would have been blinded as well. And but he had abdominal injuries, which led to a catastrophic bleed out. Okay, that's my perception of war, and it gave me an eye opener. Okay, what it did is open me up into this research. I mean, I thought, what is war all about? I'd seen these civilian groups, I'd seen how much weapons cost, I'd seen the destructive effect. And the top of my list always now, I could move this list around as much as I want, is profits. Going back to this guy's book. But that's my perception. Right, I've done a hell of a lot of research. What has doubled up and confirmed to me, it's all about making money. It's a ever-ending cycle of destruction. And there's no way of putting it, but every military weapons manufacturers this last 2 years has made record profits. Okay, so you only have to research them to confirm what I'm saying. Destruction of properties. It's pointless. When I saw like Iraqi houses destroyed, when I saw Kosovan houses completely destroyed, I was like, what is this all about? It's just mental. It's crazy. It's pointless. Okay, the destruction of lives. The ongoing generational sin to the next generation. Even Finland had a destruction of lives, even though you could argue the point that Finland were fighting the goodest caused part of the Second World War because they were defending their homeland, for example. The next generation was destroyed. Finnish people naturally don't really talk very openly. I've noticed that in the 12 years I've been here. Okay, so they hid all their sins in alcohol. That then led on to the next generation of like, why does Papa not love me or whatever? Why has he changed? He wasn't the same. I spoke to my wife's mother who said that he was a different man when he came back. He was horrible. My sister used to have to hide in the cupboard because when he was drunk, we didn't know what to do. Imagine the UK was full of people like that too. It's the same. It's no different. We can justify a war or a cause, but the generational sin is the same. The effect is the same. The effect on kids, people, mental trauma and anxiety. There's no country in the world what is capable of treating the after effects of a war, and they don't even invest in the after effects of a war. Your mental health services here is probably struggling now just with day-to-day mental health issues. So if you all went to war, came back, they couldn't cope, they couldn't help, they've got nothing in place to help. The UK is a prime example of physical trauma and rape. These things are all documented in United Nations documents and books. I've got a dozen books at home. You're welcome to loan as many as you want to show the effects around the world of these kind of things, knock-on effects from war. And it is an effect of war. Drug abuse, some of my friends have really hit drugs bad. I personally took alcohol. I wasn't an alcoholic, but I nearly died after Afghanistan drinking myself into a stupor. One of my friends stayed up with me all night, putting me to one side as I was nearly drowning in my own sick, drinking too much, trying to forget. Okay? And it's true. It is a way of trying to dampen those traumatic images. Suicides. The number I've got there, 256, 264. The Falklands War I showed you at the start. 256. This is just easily accessible on the internet. Died in the war. 264. It's probably even going up and up. Killed themselves since that war. So more people died of suicide in that particular conflict than did in the actual war. Homelessness, very hard statistic to find. I can be cross-examined on that. You could easily come back and say, Chris, you're talking shit. 4,000, 2022, I've found 2,000. You're lying. There's no real statistics. The government does not, our government in the UK does not like using that statistic. And I've spoken to a guy here, an elderly pensioner, who said after your Second World War in Finland, there was a hell of a lot of homelessness. And he gave me a really brilliant example of the Helsinki, some kind of Helsinki Olympics. I don't know if it was Summer Olympics or Winter Olympics. But they purposely cleared all the war homelessness off the streets because they saw them as an embarrassment for that Olympic period. And when he told me that a few weeks ago over a coffee, I was like, wow, homelessness not unique to just my country at the moment. It happens. It's a big effect after war. Because a lot of them are broken, and the families are broken too. When families break, it carries on with that generational sin and that cycle. Okay, broken families are perfect recruits. Economic breakdown goes hand in hand. Every war has got economic breakdown either prior to or after a conflict as a big influencer on why we go to war. When you've got no job to do, it's sometimes 3 meals a day from the military is quite an appealing thing. So economic breakdown, if you haven't noticed, is pretty much here just now in Europe and the world. So we're at a very critical point from my perception. Children. My friend Paul, who I spoke to also last week, who was in Bosnia, when he was crying to me on the messages talking about what he'd seen in Garage, he said it was the kids what affected me most. How they were getting killed and how they were just left traumatized at the end of it. And it was the same with me. Whenever I saw kids, I love kids, I adore them. They're the most innocent beings on this planet. They should run the planet, actually. They're the ones who statistically also suffer the worst. Okay, this book I've just bought, I'm probably 2 paragraphs into it, and I will read it, War on Children. It's phenomenal, the statistics in there. The effects it has on kids during war and the potential for them to be conflict children and fighting wars, little kids with AK-47s. I've met one British soldier who spoke to me when he was on an operation in Sierra Leone with the British SAS. He said, I had to kill kids. They were going to free British soldiers in Sierra Leone. We don't even know why we were there, to be honest. And he said, we had to kill kids. It's documented. The White Street Boys, or whatever they were called, this gang. They recruited kids, got them on drugs, gave them a weapon. There's a grown man telling me he had to kill kids. It's insane. And this is well documented. Refugees. I daren't even go into the statistics of refugees in our world. It's almost like that jigsaw where people have just shook up the entire world, and there's people everywhere because of the amount of conflicts that have been created around the world. And it's beyond the point now where we can cope as humanity. And we're creating this ourselves. Our governments are creating this ourselves. I had the misfortune of being on a refugee camp. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen the effect. We saw people and families getting flown out of there not all the families, getting flown to different parts of the world, and we're like, wait a second, shouldn't we be going back to Kosovo? We're liberating them. Whether they ever got back, I will never know. It was total chaos. We were put onto buses, put onto planes, flown to different parts of Europe and the world, what would take them. Only 5-6 days earlier, but we're living somewhere where their generation had lived there for years. It's mental. It's insane. Broken families. This is Jordan. I introduced you to the guy I watched die. He was almost like my son. I would say he was my favourite in my troop. I had 30 guys. He was my favourite. He was a cheeky little ass at times. A brilliant guy, lovely guy, kind of a heart of gold. I watched him die. Worst thing I had to do was go to his mum during my rest and recuperation, my 2 weeks off, and then I promised I'd go and see her and say, so we tried our best. Tried to keep him alive. Her question to me was, how did he look? Was he okay? I had to lie. No. She knew. She read the coroner's report when we had to go and do a legal thing to check up on his death, but she knew the level of trauma he'd encountered. I just said, just remember him how he was, not how I saw him. Okay? That's just one of many I encountered during my career. Okay, it broke their family. Their family's got a piece missing now. No mother should ever bury their kid, they say. But war does that. It's pointless. Disabilities. As Rob, I introduced you to all these 4 guys I knew. I trained these 2 before we went to Afghanistan. They weren't there long before they lost their legs. He lost 2 legs, he lost 1. And this guy, in my last 2 days in Afghanistan, I gave him my collapsible bed and a few of my nice bits of equipment and said, be safe, don't go there, bang, bang, bang. Try and stay safe, handshake, look after yourselves. Within about a week or so, he lost both legs. Okay, that was many. I could put up dozens of pictures of people I know who've been killed and injured, but I'm trying not to inundate you with too much. The suicide. Okay, traumatic as it is, it's a reality and it's a big effect of war. 3 of them guys killed themselves. This guy lost 2 legs and an arm. He's doing well for himself. He works in the city of London. He's got a high-profile job. This guy saved his life, but then he got blown up weeks later. I remember seeing him getting blown up weeks later. He lost his eye and everything. But his trauma didn't keep going. He killed himself. Probably because of what he'd seen there and plus the amount of pain he was left with afterwards. The guy on the top right I met in my last month or so, brilliant soldier, very professional, killed himself. And this young guy, saw him all through my 6-month tour. He saved a lot of lives finding bombs. But he was in charge of or involved in a big explosion where 5 guys died and 15 got injured or whatever. It was huge trauma everywhere, mass trauma. Something you see on a film, but worse. And when I saw his face afterwards, it changed. He was a different person. It was almost like his soul had gone because of what he'd seen. It does destroy your soul. Okay, homelessness. We've got problems all around the UK. I've tried to help people in the past. I help out with a few charities here and there. Homelessness is huge. It's a real thing, and it will be real anywhere around the world with veterans and such likes, and people who are refugees. That was my team. The day after Jordan died, Verge, or Chris, we call him there, he was blinded. He lost most of his teeth. Bits of Jordan were coming out of him for years afterwards in the form of bones and stuff in his face and his arms. All those guys, regardless of the trauma I'm elaborating on here, all them guys came from broken families, except me. My family was the only one that was together. Perfect recruiting is a broken family. Okay, and the UK is riddled with broken families. It's waiting for an influx of soldiers. Okay, and all it does is add on to the next generational sin. Since then, two of them have had broken relationships since then, or 3 of them, sorry, including myself, because of the trauma they were involved in. They couldn't cope with it. Civilian contractors, we touched on it earlier. I saw that in the Falkland Islands, Kosovo, Cyprus, Iraq, Afghanistan. They were everywhere. Okay, it's big business, multinational big business. Okay, generational sin. I read this book after the anniversary of the last British Tommy, and I would like you to read that, please. Is everyone good? I can't put into words what he said. He was in the First World War, but he's spot on. He's spot on. It's insane. Settle the differences. Why don't we have dialogue? It's 2024. Why aren't we talking? Why are we pushing towards the war? Because it's money, nothing else. But that's my perception. Okay, Harry Patch, totally admire him for what he said. These pictures here, that's Ukraine. Whether he's a Ukrainian or Russian soldier, it doesn't matter. They're still soldiers. They're still human beings. Okay, French up there, German, British. They're all human beings. They're not. Technically, you guys, you're finished. You should hate the Russians. I should hate Japanese and Germans if we go off that context. Okay, because they were the last ones we fought in the Great War. But I don't even hate the Taliban what killed my friend. Okay, that was war. That was a deal with the devil we made. Okay. So hate does us nothing good. Nothing whatsoever. Have we learned anything? What do you think? I don't mean on this PowerPoint presentation. I mean from 1918 to 2023. Have we actually learned anything as human beings? Still making the same mistakes. Still that same revolving war cycle. Okay, I don't believe we've learned a single thing. Okay, I'll quickly fly through this. I'm talking too much. Ammunition expenditure. 2006, 6-month tour. 142 Javelin weapons. That's an anti-tank rocket. They were shipped off to what's it called, Ukraine last year in their hundreds, if not their thousands. And then since then, people have been buying them in their droves. I won't get you to do the maths this time. I normally do. We're running short on time. 8,000 times 142 is 11.4 million. That's how much it cost for them to waste 142 weapons in Afghanistan when there wasn't one single tank to engage. But they shot 142 of them during that 6-month period. I've only picked up one bit of their ammunition expenditure in 6 months. Millions of rounds when you add them all up. Hellfires, 2,000-pound bombs. I saw all them go out in Afghan. Everything used there. Okay, 11.4 million. Just on anti-tank rockets with not one single enemy tank. There's no coincidence that Javelin joint venture between Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, its profits have gone up this last 2 years, hugely. Okay, because it's been battle proven now against tanks in Ukraine. There's a reason why these things get given. These products sell better when they're battle proven. If a tank proves that it's good and can take a few hits, it sells better than a tank that's never been proven in battle. So does a Javelin rocket. That is that far in the weapons industry. The weapons industry is up here. That's worth billions, probably. But I know the Secretary of State for Defense, was a joint shareholder or whatever, or some kind of on the board for Raytheon, then got the job in the US political system for the Secretary of State for Defense. Of course they're going to push wars if you want more money to go. This kind of thing happens all the time. They'll push wars because it makes money. My Dargis, I work at a Dargis now. I love it. Best job I think I've ever had in my life. All I do is cook, clean, give it out to these little kids. They come and ask really funny questions sometimes. One of them thought my name was Christmas. Once I thought it was hilarious. I said, no, it's Christopher. Is it Christmas? Brilliant. Okay, 295 times 12. That's easy bit of mathematics, but it's not 11.4 million. Okay, that's for one child in a Dargis, which is best. Let's invest in our kids and our future and not have a new generational sin instead of investing in anti-tank rockets or fast attack jets and such likes. Okay, that to me is a win-win. It's a no-brainer, we say. It's a lot better to invest in our kids. Okay, this was a German soldier. Definition of war is a place where young people who don't know each other and don't hate each other kill each other. That's a fact. Okay, by the decisions of older people who know each other, pretty much hate each other, but don't kill each other. How insane is that? I'm older, you go fight for me against that guy I don't like. Thanks very much. That's what war is. That was a German soldier in the Second World War. Okay, and he fought in the Second World War, but he worked it out, same as this old gent here. You soon work it out. Wait a second, this is insane. Okay, so to reiterate on generational trauma, I believe that we all have our own generational trauma whether it's war-driven or not. Finland's got its own case of generational trauma. You've got that trauma where the Russians are coming, probably more than most because you fought them in the 39 war, the Winter War and the Second World War, for example. But it's a real trauma. To me, there's no distinction between it. There's no justification between it. War is war. That generational trauma, is it really worth it? Is it really destroying the next generation? Are we doing anything for after that war to prepare for that generation to be looked after? We don't. So it's a repeating cycle of trauma. That's my perception. Okay, that's what I worked out in 23 years of observations in the military and in conflict and in war. However, the last book is a book I wrote, I read to my kids. An American soldier who was struggling with his trauma, and I relate to it all the way through the book, is why is Papa so mad, why is he frustrated? And I had to one day when I think my son was going mental with his belt in the back of his car, and I had to pin him down. I lost it. I was traumatized. I couldn't function properly as a human being, and I thought, wait, this is not right. I have to get a grip of this. And this book actually helped me, but it helped me trying to get my kids to understand why Papa was traumatic, why I got all this anxiety and such like. But in truthfulness, no father or mother, why is mum so mad, should ever have to read this to a child. Should we? We should never have to read something like that to our kids. We should be trying to avoid, not, what is it, we say in English, prevention is better than the cure. Okay, so we should be preventing war, not trying to cure it, because it won't cure if this circle of trauma continues. So here we go, guys. You are Finland's 4th generation. It's not up to me, it's your choice, okay? It's up to you how you take what I've taught you or put forward to you. And it's your choice. If any of you want to go, join the reservists or whatever, or join the army, it's your choice. But we all live with the consequences of our choices. Okay, but you are at a critical point in history. You are the 4th generation. You're the ones who could possibly break that trauma of war in Finland by actually standing up to governments or whatever and saying, we don't want war anymore. Why aren't you all talking? Why haven't we got dialogue? Okay, same as like the Palestinians and the Israelis. They're probably like 4 generations into their conflict too. Okay. I won't show you this video, but I can gladly send you the link. It's very traumatic. It's a guy I was in Afghanistan with, and it was published on BBC. His mum allowed to publish his suicidal thoughts and the uprunning up to it. It's a 7-minute long thing. I can't show it you. We haven't got time. But it's brutal. It's traumatic. Just listening to it kind of gives you an eye opener. Any questions? Sorry I've took you too long, guys. You want to go home now, don't you? Question?
You said that you don't take political sides.
No.
What led up to that decision?
Because there's 2 sides to a war. A human being is a human being. And what I've seen, one of the students from the last presentation I gave last year was a brilliant example. He was from Bosnia. No, not from Bosnia, sorry, from Kosovo originally. So his dad was one of the people, Serbians, who got sadly ethnically cleansed out of Kosovo after that war. But I didn't take sides there. I just saw them as human beings. But our country told us who the baddies were, who the enemy was, for example. I've kind of opened my eyes that it's almost like a game. If you've got hate and 2 sides, you'll never have dialogue. You always must have dialogue. You almost must talk. I was at school with a Russian lady when the war started, and she actually was nervous and said to me once, do you like me? Do you hate me? I said, no, I don't hate you. Why should I hate you? This is a lovely lady who's lived here for like 10, 11 years. Why should I hate her? Because she's Russian. She's not my enemy. She never has been. Same as the Taliban who were there killing our guys. They probably saw us as a threat. We were in their land. I can't justify why we were in Afghanistan. They weren't my enemy. So now I see it for what it is.
Do you regret doing the show? So do you feel like you've learned from it?
I've learned a lot. I don't regret it. Not at all. I wouldn't be here able to give you a presentation if I hadn't gone through all that trauma and experienced it, and I hope it's beneficial. None of us do anything in life what's negative. It's how you choose to analyze what's happening in your life. It's how you choose to learn from it. There's good and bad, but you have to really make a strong choice of like, well, I can take good from this. Okay, we can do that with anything. Anything. You just have to have a lot of strength and belief. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for your time. It's very precious.
Yeah. Så, har ni syns nästa gång igen. Då är det bra bästa som är här och föreläsare också.